Before I begin, I want to thank my co-authors. Jane and Andrew are both biologists at the Lake St. Clair Station with Erie Fisheries, but also our partner agencies. Nothing that we do here in the St. Clair Detroit River system occurs in a vacuum. It's all well coordinated with Ontario, Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS, and our partner agencies around Lake Erie, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. So I always like to kind of throw an outline up here, show where I'm going to go with this. It's really hard to cover everything that's going on in this incredible fishery in 15 minutes. So just going to hit a few highlights, touch on Lake Erie walleye and yellow perch, some work we've been doing with smallmouth bass in Lake St. Clair, some of our lake sturgeon assessment work that Andrew leads, and then an update on some of the acoustic telemetry work that's going on in the corridor. One thing that I like to highlight for folks with this fishery is that it is incredible when you look at it in relation to the other Great Lakes. So left-hand side of the screen is total angler effort across Michigan waters of the Great Lakes. Right-hand side is total harvest. You can see that Lake St. Clair and Lake Erie combined account for, maybe 21% of total angler effort, about 30% of the harvest across all the Great Lakes. But what's really neat is when you start to break this down by fish per angler hour. So if you look at the amount of harvest that occurs per angler hour in Lake Erie, it's 2.5 times that of Lakes Huron, Michigan, and Superior combined. It's pretty incredible, right? What's interesting is when you look at Lake St. Clair, it's a lot lower. And that is because we have a different focus in those fisheries, right? Lake Erie, very harvest oriented for walleye and yellow perch. Lake St. Clair has got really catch and release orientation with smallmouth bass, muskie, and some of the other species. So it's not surprising to see that the harvest rates in Lake St. Clair are lower than Lake Erie. When you look at the intensity of the fishery, so this is the amount of effort that is expended per square mile of surface area within the lakes. Lake Erie and Lake St. Clair are incredibly intense. So Lake Erie is 43 times the amount of angler effort on a per square mile basis compared to Lakes Huron, Michigan, and Superior. Lake St. Clair is 30 times that. So we have an incredibly intense fishery in our backyard. I want to move into Lake Erie walleye. This is statistical catch and age model projections and estimates of the population size of H2 and older fish, so those that are susceptible to harvest each year. And this is from the Walleye Task Group report that is put out by the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, Lake Erie Committee Walleye Task Group each year. You'll be hearing from our co-chairs of that group, Matt Faust and Mike Thorne, a little bit later this evening, but want to draw your attention to the right-hand side of this graph. You can see that over the past 6-7 years, that walleye population of 2 and older walleye has been hovering around 80 million fish. And it's projected to be very similar in 2025. So like I've heard one of my colleagues say, the good old days of walleye fishing in Lake Erie are now. It's absolutely incredible fishery. I'd expect to see a lot of large fish out there this year. Given that we've had some pretty strong recruitment events going back to 2015, 2016, those fish are going to be pretty decent size now. No surprise here, 2025 bag limit for Michigan waters of Lake Erie, or the possession limit, if you want me to be technically correct, is 6 fish, and that'll be through April 30th, 2026. Yellow perch on the West Basin, so what we refer to as Management Unit 1, the past few years has been relatively stable. I would expect better yellow perch catch rates here in the West Basin compared to what you might see in some of the central units. Moving down to smallmouth bass in Lake St. Clair, or actually moving up to smallmouth bass in Lake St. Clair. We've seen some really positive changes in fish size over the years in smallmouth bass. This is just a graph of how the size structure of the population has changed through time for fish that are larger than 14 inches, which are the black dots, and fish that are greater than 17 inches, which are the gray triangles. And the metric on the left-hand side of the screen, the proportional stock density, is just simply proportion of how many of those size fish are in the population. And you can see that we have an increasing proportion of larger fish through time. So we've had a lot of questions about what might be driving that. And a lot of folks think that it's changes in growth. So if you look at the length of these fish by different age groups through time, you can see that it's pretty consistent going on back to the 1970s. So it kind of debunks the one theory that I've heard a lot is that it is round gobies that are driving that increase in growth. Gobies came into the system in 1990, and you can see before and after that time, the lengths of those particular age groups has been very consistent. There's one little uptick that you might notice 2006, 2007, and that is actually due to us changing the structure that we use to age those fish. We shifted from scales to dorsal spine sections to age them. So that resulted in a little shift in the size, but overall, no change in growth through time. What's driving that is the survival of smallmouth bass has been on a steady increase since the 1970s. If you were to draw a trend line through these dots, this is the proportion of our survey catch that is age 6 and older. You can see that that trend line would be increasing through time. So the survival of smallmouth bass is increasing, which had, caused us to ask, well, what is driving that change and increase in survival? And we think it has a lot to do with angler behavior and the adoption of the catch and release ethic. So if you went back to the 1980s, there's, I would say, a much stronger harvest mentality towards smallmouth bass. And you can see that reflected here in the number of fish that were estimated to be harvested from our creel surveys of Lake St. Clair. And if you look at that through time, the amount of fish that has been harvested or the amount of smallmouth bass that have been harvested has consistently dropped to where now it's 95% or more catch and release of smallmouth bass in Lake St. Clair each year. So you can see the effects of that catch and release ethic showing up in the population by the number of larger individuals that are out there. Moving over to our lake sturgeon assessment. This is always a popular one with folks. Lake sturgeon are a fantastic, charismatic species, very interesting. Everybody loves to see and catch the big fish. We do a set line survey in the North Channel of the St. Clair River each year. In 2024, we did 88 set line sets, caught about 100 fish. 60 of those were juveniles, 38 were adults, ranging anywhere from 19 to over 70 inches in length, weighing anywhere from 1 to 110 pounds. And 43 of those fish were recaptured fish that we had caught before. So we tag these fish each year. We can determine what ones we've recaptured through time. That's about 44% of our catch. Andrew can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a little higher than what we usually see. We usually have about a third of our fish being recaptured fish each year. So a few more recaptures this year. Want to draw your attention to the juvenile fish. So that is the purple line here. And if you go back to about 2018, 2019, you can see that the number of fish that we've caught that are juveniles has actually surpassed the number of adults that we've been catching. So we're seeing this increasing trend of more juveniles in our catch. We're not really sure what explains that, but it's interesting that that actually lines up with some of the reef construction work that's been done in the St. Clair Detroit River system. And so, maybe now perhaps we're seeing a benefit of that actually manifest itself as more juvenile lake sturgeon production. Lake sturgeon harvest, this is something that I find really interesting. So we are one of the few places in Michigan that you can harvest a lake sturgeon. We have a regulation that's 1 fish per year. It's a 42 to 50 inch slot. So the fish have to be within that size range to be able to be kept. And that season is July 16th through September 30th of each year. And you can see that the number of fish harvested went kind of on an increasing trend through time till about 2017, 2018. And then it started to drop to the point that our harvest in 2024, which was 4 fish that were registered, was the lowest that we've seen since I think 2011. So I think it speaks again to that catch and release philosophy that many anglers have. This has been a really popular fishery, but folks enjoy going out there, catching those fish and then releasing them. I think since we started having the mandatory registration, I want to say we've had like only 130 fish that have been registered as harvested within the system or was it 130? It's Andrew, you got to help me out on this one.
130 anglers.
130 anglers. Yep. have taken a fish home and have registered them. I think only 19 anglers have registered more than one fish harvested in multiple years. So there is not a lot of harvest occurring within the system, but if you go out in the evenings in some areas of the lower St. Clair River, it's not unusual at all to see a lot of boats out there taking advantage of that sturgeon fishery. It's a really unique opportunity that we have in our area of Michigan. Just touching really briefly on a few of the acoustic telemetry updates that we have. As you know, acoustic telemetry is a technology that we have that allows us to track the movements of fish with great detail. We have different size tags that we can implant into those. Those tags ping off of receivers located throughout the Great Lakes, and they allow us to reconstruct the movement patterns of fish. Right now at our station, we have 3 active studies going on. We've been tagging smallmouth bass with acoustic tags since 2021. We've done some work with a unique species that we have here in the St. Clair Detroit River system, moon eye, since 2023. And then Andrew's been leading some northern pike work since 2023 as well. The acoustic receiver grid in Lake St. Clair, which I want to focus on here, is a series of white, blue, and red dots here. Kind of creates a grid system across the lake. So when those fish are swimming around, those tags are pinging and those receivers are picking up those tag pings and allowing us to track that movement. Smallmouth bass movement, this has been really interesting. There's some data that have really lined up pretty well with some of the jaw tagging work that we've done in the lake. On average, smallmouth bass are moving about a half mile per day. So you scale that up to a year, that's about 200 miles per year. Interestingly, angler caught fish move less. So that's compared to fish not caught by anglers. So we don't know if that's maybe a cause of angling vulnerability or a result of capture. And then we're seeing, like I said, the similar patterns in our movement data between what we've seen with jaw tags and the acoustic telemetry tags. Interestingly, those smallmouth bass rarely move across the shipping channel that bisects Lake St. Clair over to Ontario waters. And there's also strong separation of groups of fish that we've tagged in the north area of the lake in Anchor Bay and the southern area of the lake along the mile roads. Those 2 tagging groups very rarely mix with one another, and our jaw tagging data show that too. So it's kind of looking like smallmouth bass might be relative home bodies when you think about how far they move. Northern pike, we are just starting to get some results from that. So those are forthcoming. Andrew's been out doing a lot of listening for those tags this spring. So we hope to have more results on that in the near future. If you are interested in any of the results from our survey work, every year we do a status report of our survey results in the St. Clair Detroit River system. We're hoping to get that status report together soon, but you can find past summaries and past status reports on our webpage, which you can get from this QR code or just going to Google and punching in Michigan DNR Lake St. Clair Fisheries Research Station. That will find us and lead you to our reports that we have published there online. So with that, I wanted to mention too, so this is our research vessel, the Channel Cat. This is the boat that we do the bulk of our survey work off of each year. This vessel is entering its 57th year of service this year. So we are really, our staff, I think, are coming together and are really starting to advocate for getting this boat replaced. It is the oldest one that we currently have in Fisheries Division's fleet by like 30 some years. So it's been around a while, but she's due for replacement. So with that, Erica, I'll turn it back to you.